India is EU's third largest trading partner, and both the side have been engaging in free trade agreement negotiations also. To talk more about India-EU trade partnership and how the way forward is, we are joined by EU Trade Commissioner in Delhi, Mr. Dombrovskis. And to begin with, ever since this trade negotiation has been relaunched, I think 2 years ago, what is the status right now? Where is it is stuck, or how far have we reached in this whole negotiation process?
Indeed, EU and India are strategic partners, and we are developing this partnership across different range of areas, including in trade. And we relaunched our negotiations on free trade agreement, but we also launched negotiations on investment protection agreement and on protection of geographical indications. On free trade agreement, negotiations are ongoing very intensively. We already had 5 rounds of negotiations. And we are making progress on a number of areas, but there are still also a lot of outstanding areas where further work is needed. Actually, later this week I'm going to have also a high-level economic dialogue with Minister Piyush Goyal, where we'll be discussing those topics in more detail, how to make further progress. In any case, from the EU side, we aim for a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement covering broad range of areas outside just traditional tariff liberalization discussions.
If you could throw some light on the market access and import duty, that remains biggest point of contention right now. So how are you going to, what are the sectors where the whole process of negotiation is still stuck? What are the India's concern, and how are you trying to address those things?
I would say the purpose of any free trade agreement is actually improving market access, reduction of tariffs. So there is a shared understanding from both sides on this. Well, I cannot now discuss, specific sectors or lines, as it's still a work in progress. But I also would emphasize that we are looking also on other areas in the context of free trade agreement, like access to public procurement, questions related to trade and sustainable development. So there's more than just a question of reducing tariffs.
We are hearing a lot about this global economic disorder or instability, especially in the last 3-4 years of COVID pandemic. This term has been used very prolifically, that the supply chain disruption has caused economies around the world to have concern and to think about new paradigm shift. How do you think India and EU can work together, and what are the area of cooperation where the two sides can work together to have a more stable global economic order?
Indeed, we see that first in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, we saw many supply chain disruptions, but also in a current more conflictual geopolitical environment, also in the context of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So indeed, there is this paradigm shift, so to say, from efficiency-based approach to resilience-based approach, and indeed there is lots of work going on strengthening the resilience of supply chains, addressing strategic dependencies. This is one of the topics we are discussing, for example, in EU-India Trade and Technology Council, but this topic features prominently also at G7 and G20 discussions, and so it's going to be discussed also this week in G20 Trade Ministers meeting.
Okay. When you are discussing about this economic stability and in the world order, also China has emerged as one of the major economic power. It has investment across the world in various sectors, and in the last 3-4 years, when we talk about this resilience and supply chain disruption, the scope of China has also been a worry. How do you see China's role in terms of economic stability in the current world order, and how do you see India and EU can cooperate or counter that effect of Chinese economy or Chinese hegemony, if we can so say, in the world order?
First of all, it's clear that everyone is better if we uphold international rules-based international order, including in area of trade. And we know that China has benefited enormously for its membership in the World Trade Organization. So it's also China's responsibility to ensure that World Trade Organization can continue to function successfully. So we are engaging on discussions on WTO reform, how to ensure that international rules-based order can be upheld. We know that there are other challenges to this. I was mentioning Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So there are lots of issues which need to be dealt to address this resilience of supply chains and disruptions which we are facing.
So when we talk about this resilience of supply chain, we are also talking about India emerging as a destination where the manufacturing hub can be created, which has so far been very much centered and concentrated in China. How do you see, as a European Union Trade Commissioner, that India's scope and India's scale and India's potential as a upcoming major manufacturing hub for European countries?
Certainly there is lots of untapped potential in EU-India economic relations. Our trade is growing rapidly. Also, investment flows are increasing quite substantially. But still, if you even use this comparison with China, there is much more potential which we can do with India. What is obviously important for this is to ensure a stable economic environment. For example, to attract more European investment, it's important to have investment protection agreement in place, which we are currently negotiating. To emerge as manufacturing hub, for example, for exports to the EU, it's important to remove tariff barriers. For example, in ASEAN region, we had seen that once Vietnam was concluding free trade agreement with EU, it gave them really a competitive advantage to emerge as such kind of manufacturing hub also for exports to the EU. So India has a potential to do the same, and given the size of its economy, actually potential to do more.
Also, when we talk about this India-EU cooperation, any sector-specific area that you are looking at having more collaboration in terms of stability and shifting manufacturing base in India? Because I think recently Indian government has announced a lot of incentives for electronic manufacturing or manufacturing in other areas as well.
Indeed, we are looking in those different areas. Those discussions are also taking in the context of Trade and Technology Council, which we have with India. Also, we are looking at cooperation in area of green energy and hydrogen. It's a recent initiatives. As I said, there's lots of potential, so it's important we intensify our cooperation, we intensify our negotiations, reach agreements, and then use this potential.
I also like to ask about this whole China dynamics when we talk about in international geopolitics or geoeconomics. There is this term that has been recently coined that you want to de-risk with Chinese economy, but you don't want to decouple because of obvious reason. It has a long history of investment in European. So how do we balance that to have no risk coming from that the same country and engaging with the same country where you think that there can be potential danger in global supply chain disruption sort of things?
Indeed, we are using this term de-risking, and that brings us back to the discussion on resilience of the supply chains. Obviously, we have a very complex relationship with China. So in EU, we are saying that China is in some sectors our cooperation partner. Like, for example, if we want to fight climate change, obviously we need to cooperate with China, which is the biggest emitter. China is at the same time economic competitor, and also China is a systemic rival as it's promoting different socio-economic system. So we need to navigate this very complex relationship. We of course need to take into account the fact that China is the second biggest economy in the world. It's also the second biggest trading partner for the EU. So therefore we see areas of cooperation where we can find those areas of cooperation, and where we de-risk where we see some strategic dependencies.
Of course, and talking about this whole Russia-Ukraine conflict that has happened in the last 1.5 years or so, you have been mentioning about this, how it has damaged or how it has disrupted the world economic order. there has been continuous sanction that has been put against Russia. How much of impact do you think it has created in Russia's ability to continue with this war in Ukraine?
Indeed, from the EU and many other countries, we have put unprecedented sanctions against Russia. In EU, we have put forward 11 sanctions packages to reduce Russia's ability to wage the war, so reduce their ability to finance the war, and also technological possibilities, talking about high-tech and dual-use items reaching Russia. We see that those sanctions are having impact. If we look, for example, at the last year was marked by record high energy prices. And for Russia as a major energy exporter, it should have been a good year for Russia's economy. Instead, Russia's economy was in recession. This year, there are different forecasts on the economy, and also the economic data which is now coming from Russia is not reliable, but we see problems in many manufacturing sectors. We see rapidly depreciating ruble, so we see that sanctions are having an impact. So what is important now is to stay the course, to keep providing all necessary support to Ukraine so that it can fight against Russia, it can defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and it can eventually win this war, and to keep pressure on aggressor Russia.
So talking about the Russia, same another way, if you have been putting sanction against Russia, Russia have been finding ways to sell its product and commodities in the international market. Recent months, India has also emerged as one of the key importer of Russian crude. In fact, Russia has become the largest crude supplier to India right now. China has also been importing Russian crude like way more than it used to be. So I think how much will you say that Russia has been able to circumvent through the sanctions regime that the EU and its partner countries are trying to put against Russia to stop having enough revenue or enough resources to fund its war?
Indeed, sanctions would have been more effective if more countries were joining this. We know that there are obviously a number of important countries which are not joining the sanctions, but we are in dialogue also with those countries to exactly avoid sanction circumventions and other effects. There is also, if we talk about the revenue sources, the main revenue source for Russia's budget is sale of oil. And there we see also the effects of so-called G7 plus price cap, which has been introduced on price of exports of Russian oil.
Have you had any conversation with the Indian partners on the issue of how these sanctions can be more, stronger if India would cooperate with the EU sanctions against Russia?
Obviously we have those discussions with, as I said, different players around the world, and obviously we had been raising it also in our bilateral discussions with India.
Okay, talking about this environmental issues, green hydrogen, like you mentioned, has also emerged as one of the major part of upcoming research and development projects. How much of cooperation has been going on between European Union and India on the issue of energy transition and finding new avenues of energy resources in terms of green energy?
Well, as I was mentioning, indeed, EU India has developed partnership on green energy and hydrogen. Including EU is providing financing for this. For example, European Investment Bank has announced a 1 billion euros financing program for development of focusing exactly on green hydrogen. Clearly, India is now the most populous country in the world, has important role to play in a global fight against climate change and addressing other environmental issues. So we are interested to cooperate, and green energy is important part of this cooperation.
One complaint has always been from the side of developing countries that the enough of resources and the technical expertise that the European countries or the developed countries have, they are not willing to share it more openly with the developing world. How much? What's your opinion on that?
Actually, we are willing to promote green technologies and, not only in the area of energy, but the green tech more general. I was mentioning several times our Trade and Technology Council exactly the green technologies is also one of the areas which we are discussing how we can cooperate more on this. I was also mentioning the importance of conducive business environment and investment protection agreements, so that investors which are doing those investments, especially in new cutting-edge technologies, can be assured that their investments are actually protected and that it benefits both the country in question and that it benefits also investors.
Before we end our discussion, my final question will be, how far are we before India and EU can finalize their free trade agreement? Could we see that like in this year only this thing can happen?
We normally try to avoid too much focus on fixed deadlines, as we are saying it's substance over deadline. So we need to make progress on substance, and once we have progress on substance, we can conclude in a due course.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to you.